warm welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I am Godfrey Mutizwa. Now, according to the United Nations, by 2050, approximately 7 out of 10 people will live in megacities. And if we look at that figure in Africa, we're talking about 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who are living in slums, and that was in 2010. Now, that's 62% of the population. So clearly, there's a lot of work to be done in developing this drive towards megacities. Now, before we get into the discussion, let's just take a look at what this drives towards urbanization is set to do in terms of creating investment opportunities on the African continent. Pelani Nyalunga will report.
According to the United Nations, a megacity is a metropolitan area with a total population of more than 10 million people. Africa is already home to one of the world's fastest growing megacities, creating a fertile ground for growth opportunities on the continent.
A megacity is it's a city where you've got a population in excess of 10 million. So at the moment, Africa has got 2 megacities. Cairo, which has got a population of 16 million, and Lagos, where the population is between 13 and 14 million.
People in rural areas and villages are migrating to urban areas in search of a better life. According to a study by Standard Bank, more than 60% of Africans will live in urban areas by 2050.
If you look at projected population forecasts, by 2015, you're likely going to be having in the region of 1.2 billion Africans living in cities. The level at the moment is about 416. So certainly in time there will be more megacities. And if you look at the reasons for the development of these megacities, of course it's driven by increased urban populations. People coming from rural areas, the countryside, where we've seen the impact of technology on agriculture, where you get less of a reliance on labor-based practices. So that brings people into the cities because they simply can't find jobs in the agricultural sectors in the countryside.
This rapid rate of urbanization on the continent presents both opportunities and challenges. According to the World Bank, urbanization helps pull people out of poverty and advance progress towards the Millennium Development Goals. However, if not managed properly, it could also lead to an increase in slums, pollution and crime.
The challenges are numerous, and it's really the things that you want to avoid. Slums, urban sprawl, an increase in pollution, where that comes from vehicle emissions and noise pollution, and of course socio-economic concerns as well.
According to the United Nations, the number of people living in slums decreased from 47 to 37% in the developing world between 1990 and 2005. However, due to a rapid increase in population numbers, the number of slum dwellers is rising once again. With Africans moving to urban areas, private-public partnerships are needed to address the glaring challenges that inherently come with megacities. Pelani Nyalunga, CNBC Africa, Johannesburg.
Joining me now at the desk to discuss the future of Africa's cities is Nontokozo Hadebe. She is Group Strategy Policy Coordinator for the City of Johannesburg. And next to her is Andile Skosana, who is Associate Director for Government Advisory Services at KPMG. And also with us is Hugh Fraser, is architect from Paragon Group. And from Lagos, we'll be joined by David Frame, is Managing Director at South Energics. Welcome everybody, and thanks for coming for this very important discussion, particularly given the context of what we know is happening within the African economy and also the other trends that we have seen. I mean, there have been a lot of figures that have been banded around about where Africa is going, the increase in the urban populations. Now, when you look at that overall picture, let's begin first by painting a picture of where Africa is right now in terms of its megacities development. Can I start with you, Andile? Perhaps just to give us that sense, where are we in terms of the growth and development of Africa's megacities? How many are there and where are they?
Thank you. my understanding is that we have two megacities, but there is a bit of a debate around how do you define a megacity.
Let's constrain ourselves to the strict United Nations definition of it.
We are at two mega.
We've got two megacities,
Lagos and Cairo,
and that's Lagos and Cairo in Egypt.
That's where we are.
You?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's possible that Kinshasa could be included in that. But certainly, again, with statistics, it depends whose figures you're listening to. So I would say that one should rather talk about the tone of the cities rather than specific figures, because quite frankly, I think Johannesburg, although we think it's so big, it's going to be a long time before it's up with amongst the cities of Africa. I mean, I think by 2050, I think almost a third of the mega cities will be African. So how we fit into that scheme is of more interest than strict figures.
And I think it's important that we talk about these things, because we know that of the two big mega cities, we actually have Lagos and we have got Cairo. But Lagos, we know a large part of that population resides in slums. And yet, one of the figures that was quoted about the World Bank is they speak about the fact that when you urbanize, you actually reduce poverty. Now, how do we get to that state? Let me begin by you, and then let's come through the others.
Okay.
You know, I think the single biggest factor is transportation. It has a profound impact on any city. So one will find by 2050, most of the developed cities are unlikely to grow. I mean, the populations are not migrating towards them. And I also think, if one could draw an analogy with movies, for example, I think that the future is going to be much more Blade Runner than Star Trek. It's not going to be beautiful and clean and lovely. It's going to be somewhat gorgeous and great, and somewhat terrible with a lot in between. And especially in Africa, because services are not great, transport is not great, and infrastructure is not great. But it's something that we should be working on with immediate effect. Yeah.
Now, Andile, you advise governments obviously on what they need to be doing, and I would imagine that you work with governments across the African continent as KPMG. From where you sit, what needs to be addressed before we get specific examples out of Johannesburg as well as Lagos?
Well, megacities are one focus, and the strict definition, I think I'll go with Hugh, to say it's actually big cities become more and more complex in terms of how they deliver services, in terms of how do you make decisions about the future. Even thinking about the future, there are so many layers of to think about. Where we like to focus on is we like to focus on making sure that we grow an infrastructure backbone to the settlements, and take an overall settlement view, an integrated one that begins to try and understand the different dynamics, not only now as we face them. That's where the challenges are in all our cities that you've named, the slums, the transport, and all of that. How do we resolve these problems, but resolve them with the future towards being a little bit more resilient and hopefully sustainable in the future?
Nontokos, let me come to you. Now, of course, as you said, Johannesburg is growing, and it's growing very fast. And I think you guys have also done some projections where you see the city's population in the years ahead. I actually had the pleasure of actually interviewing the mayor of the Western District the Western District, which incorporates, not Ekurhuleni, but Mohale City and all the other cities on the West Rand, where they are amalgamating those to create one big municipality. With the city of Johannesburg, where are you guys going, and where do you stand? Are you encouraging this development of urban sprawl, if you like, or is it better actually to manage these things separately on their own?
Certainly with Johannesburg, as we have indicated, that we are growing, we are projecting that by the 2050, which is the main discussion for today, will be like close to 9 million. And we've done all we can in terms of providing services, of allowing migration and leveraging on urbanization in terms of city of Johannesburg. But
so you're encouraging it?
We're encouraging it. The city of Johannesburg, it's a city of vibrant cosmopolitan
opportunity, as they say.
And census even indicates that at this point in time, more people are coming outside of Johannesburg than they were in the previous census in 2001. So we are really experiencing that migration and urbanization, and there's nothing we can do about it but just to embrace it. I will agree that transportation is key in managing this. But it also goes down on how you manage your city, spatially. How you configure your city spatially to manage the urban sprawl, which we have seen. We've got so many areas that are really outside of the core of the inner city in Johannesburg. So we are really looking at how we can really restructure the city now and bring it closer and bring everybody closer, but at a backbone. Transportation is key in managing.
I want us to talk about the models of how we run these cities. But before we do that, let's go to Lagos and get the experience of David in Eco Atlantic, because you guys have actually developed a little mini city within Lagos. David, talk to us about some of the issues that you have faced and opportunities that you have seen and how that project is going so far.
Yes, well, the project actually reached a major milestone just recently. We've achieved 50% of the total reclamation of the project, which is 5 million square meters. And we are getting a lot of interest locally, and we're developing the infrastructure right now in the early phases, phase 1 and 2. So the project is moving along at pace and on program, and it is gaining a lot of interest. But in terms of investment, we have a very high level of take-up of plots in the early phase 1.
How have you integrated yourself within the overall development of the city of Lagos?
Well, the Eco Atlantic is really, in essence, an extension of the existing commercial area of Lagos, which is Victoria Island. And its original concept was to find a permanent solution to the rapid erosion of the coastal area of Victoria Island, which is known as Bar Beach. This was a serious concern to the Lagos state government, and they approached us to come in and solve the problem for them.
Thank you, David. Guys, as I said, I wanted us to talk also about just how we manage these cities. What models do we need to manage these things? You advise governments. Let's talk to you, and we'll talk to her, and then we'll talk to you.
Well, there's a couple of models of how you can grow and manage the growth of a city. The first thing, you can actually use your own funds as an organ of state.
As a city. So in other words, taxpayers' money. And
taxpayers' money is the one that you put up front. You use it to develop all the necessary infrastructure. That is in desperate short supply. There's always, the needs always exceed. They always exceed what is possible and what needs to be done. And then you're finding that with cities, there's a lot of different options that they're exploring. There is the Eco Atlantic example, which Nairobi is exploring through Tatu City. I think to an extent you could argue Waterfall Park in Midrand is a type of that scenario, where you've got the private sector coming in and taking on some of the public services to provide within their developments. Where we would like to play, or where we are focusing our efforts as KPMG, is developing and strengthening the ability of cities to prioritize the projects they have that, with the little resources that they have, so that when they do leverage relationships with the public sector, with the private sector, and they leverage those partnerships to much better effect.
But now, of course, you make your money both ways. You make your money by encouraging private developments, but you also make your money by advising governments even in the models that they are following at the moment. But what do you recommend? What works best?
I think what works best is what responds to the needs of the community. Ideally, well, just a bit of context. In Africa, we had 950 million people in 2010. We're going to have a projected 2 billion by 2050. That's only in 40 years' time. And what we're going to do is that, what we'll have to do is we'll have to provide all the basic services for all these people who'll be mainly in cities. What that means is that not only are you having more people coming into a city, but you've got the same infrastructure that is falling behind as well. What we are trying to do in our advice is to make sure that at least public resources focus on keeping abreast with the maintenance of current infrastructure, which has been overlooked.
That's an important point, because before the program started, we were discussing it and we were saying, so what will Joburg look like in 2050? And then I remember you guys saying, we don't know what's it going to look like. But well, she's here and she can tell us. What model are you following?
Certainly, let me just go back to that. It's music to my ear when he talks about funding and funding and needs surpassing. Funding needs surpassing the plans that we have. You will have heard that as City of Johannesburg, we are really looking into investing about 110 billion on infrastructure investment in preparation of the growth and the urbanization that I was talking about.
Yeah.
But also it's not just funding for new infrastructure, but also just to maintain, as you're saying, that we are really lagging behind in terms of maintenance. So there's a big portion of that 110 billion that will go towards dealing with the backlogs that we have, servicing the infrastructure in preparation of the growth, as well as investing in key economic infrastructure that will drive the economy of the city, as well as the neighboring municipalities, obviously. We had tried before a model that was called Cosmos City. I know you've mentioned Waterfall, but there's another model that we've just tested.
Out on the West Rand?
Yes, it's more on the West Rand, yes. Yes, on the edges of West Rand, really.
Yeah.
Cosmos City, where we tried a mixed development type of housing, mainly housing driven. We are building in that type of model throughout the city.
Yeah.
There were key learnings that we've learned.
I actually want those learnings because I want to ask you about them and perhaps whether you're doing anything different. But I quickly want to get your perspective before we take the break.
David mentioned a very interesting word. He said reclaim. And expansion generally happens for one of two reasons, either because of lack of space or for, let's say, political contested reasons. And I know, for example, expansion in Kinshasa has become so fraught that there are exercises to even start reclaiming pieces of land in the middle of the Congo River, because the process of trying to get the land ownership from the people is too complex.
Yeah.
The same thing has happened or similar thing has happened in Nairobi, where they've started to build their own Santon. Now, South African cities are far and away not dense cities like Tokyo or Sao Paulo. We've got a completely different model. I mean, I'm deeply in love with Johannesburg, and anybody who's been on the critical mass cycle ride, there is loads of space, and it always comes as a huge disappointment to me that we have to go out with this terrible viral spread to the edges of Johannesburg, which simply makes, as we've discussed, transport even more complex. When there's lots of space in downtown Johannesburg,
that's undeveloped,
and that it could be developed on a mixed basis unit. I mean, anybody knows that a great city is one that you feel comfortable in, that you walk around with the street side cafes, and unfortunately, Johannesburg is not a city like that.
It is very interesting because for me, as I drive past the N1 every day and I look at the KPMG offices and I look at the way they are structured and where they are built, I mean, that could have been just land that was unused. And I mention it not because you're in the show, but actually because it is very interesting what you can do with clever use of land, and that has been done certainly in that case. But we have to take a short commercial break, and when we return, we'll be hearing views from Lagos, Nigeria, and certainly we'll be talking to David about Eco-Atlantic and the examples that they've seen from that side. That's more on the other side on Invest Africa.